Agreeableness is negatively correlated with income, which is exactly what you'd expect if you were negotiating with someone who was self-sacrificing, because they're not going to put forward their side of the power equation as forcefully as someone who is disagreeable. So, but you know, in order to raise a baby, you have to be self-sacrificing. There's no two ways about it. You might find that rewarding and worthwhile, but I don't believe there is a parent who actually becomes a good parent who doesn't put their child's welfare first, and I think that's particularly true of mothers, particularly in the first year after birth. It's probably true right up to the age of 3, but I think it's virtually undeniably true for the first year. Agreeableness seems to be the dimension between, we certainly know agreeable people are empathic and compassionate and polite. We know less about disagreeable people, although we know that they're more likely to be male. Now, you could associate being disagreeable with being more callous and more harsh and more selfish, in that if you had to bargain with someone who's low in agreeableness, they would fight harder for their side of the equation than someone high in agreeableness would fight for theirs. Now, there's a couple of things about human beings that aren't considered sufficiently, I believe, insofar as we conceptualize human personality. And one is that humans are unbelievably maternal, both genders. They have to be, because our babies are born, for a mammal of our size, the gestation period should be 2 years, not 9 months. And so what that means is that babies, human babies, are really born premature. And you can tell that because, you know, like ungulates, deer, I think deer's an ungulate, doesn't matter. Pretty much as soon as they're born, they can stagger up on their legs and start to run around. Whereas a human baby isn't doing that till 15 months or 13 months or 17 months, or depending on the baby. You know, so, and babies are pretty much completely helpless at birth. And so they need a tremendous amount of care. And then because we have such a large cortex and because we're so behaviorally plastic, we have an extraordinarily long dependence and development period. You know, it's a minimum, it depends on the culture, but it's a minimum of 13 years, and it can certainly extend far beyond that, and does in cultures where there's a tremendous amount of inculcation of information. So, we also know that maternal behavior is very common among mammals. I mean, the very definition of mammal in some sense has to do with maternal behavior, because mammals, well, they bear live young and they produce milk. Well, they're warm-blooded, and there's some other characteristics. So the ability to care for helpless, frequently upset, dependent creatures for a very long period of time is part of our behavioral repertoire. Now then you might wonder, are there individual differences in the degree to which people are maternal? And I think that's captured at least in part with agreeableness. It makes sense, because on the positive pole of agreeableness, that's where you get warmth and compassion and empathy and the desire to care for others and self-sacrifice, I would say. A woman who's high in the socioeconomic ladder is going to pick a man who's high in the socioeconomic ladder. She's going to marry across or up. That's what the data show. And what that means is that most female potential law partners in their early 30s are married to someone who makes a fair bit of money. So the absolute magnitude of their income is no longer as relevant as it would be if they were single. It's also one of the factors, by the way, that's contributing to the polarization of society into those who have a lot of money and those who have none. Because what happens is that men who are rich will marry women who are poor, but women who are rich will not marry men who are poor. And so what happens across time is that sort of grinds its way through the culture, is that all the rich women are with rich men. And that increases the probability that wealth is going to pool in the hands of fewer and fewer people. What the women seem to realize or conclude, I would say it's two things. One is that it's just not that much fun to work for 80 hours a week. Really, like it's, and if you want to have a life outside of work, that's not the to do it. And so then you might ask, well, why would anyone work 80 hours a week? Because that's the real question. It's not why some women won't, because obviously, why would you, you know? The answer is, well, there's a lot of status and there's a lot of money associated with it. But the thing is that status is more important to men than it is to women. And I think that's individually true and also genetically true. Because for men, status is associated with how attractive they are to women. Whereas for women, status, socioeconomic status, has nothing to do with how attractive they are to men. In fact, if anything, one of the things you find, for example, is that as women are segregated, so to speak, higher and higher up the IQ distribution, the probability that they'll get married goes lower and lower. And the reason for that is that it's harder, you know, if you're at the 95th percentile of intelligence and you're going to marry across and up, you've already limited to 1 in 20 people. Just maintain the same level. And so if you're very intelligent, very educated, and you also have a very high status job, if you're a woman, well, first of all, you're bloody intimidating to most men, and second, the probability that you're going to choose from a spot in the hierarchy lower than you is very low. You're just not going to be attracted to that person. And so what happens to women who are exceptionally intelligent is that the pool of acceptable mating partners starts to become vanishingly small. So in that, combined with the propensity of women to judge 85% of men in online dating services as less attractive than average, makes it that much more difficult. Now I should say, you know, all the prejudice is clearly not on the side of women, and by no means, because if you look at male attitudes towards women in large online dating site studies, you'll find that their preference for body configuration is 21 years old. And that doesn't change as the male's age. So, you know, the selection criteria on both the male and the female side are extremely harsh.